This is 1 mana left. And this is a video that is for people who played Path of Exile 2, but never played Path of Exile 1, and are maybe wanting to play the upcoming League they're coming out with. It's not a full patch, it's not 326, but it's going to be 19 new Ascendancies. And they've been slowly teasing them. They've released some of the information on 4 of them. I'm guessing in the coming week or two we'll probably get the remaining 15. But if you're just brand new to PoE1 in general, but you maybe showed up to PoE2, this video is for you, and I'm going to go over the differences between the two games. So, without further ado, I'm going to peace out to this game and show up to this game. Alright, so you're brand new, or maybe you're just wanting a refresher and you played a little bit of PoE1 before. I'm going to go through a list here I've made on what you need to know. General differences. I'm just going to start right to the main key differences. If you've been playing PoE2 this full time, the endgame has gotten to a point where it's a pretty stale meta. There's not a lot of variety, and everyone's just running around blowing up the entire screen in 1 second, and then proceeding to run at the speed of smell. That's pretty much the whole PoE2 endgame. In PoE1, you'll have approximately the same clear coverage, but your character will be much, much faster if you actually make it to the endgame. Now, I know what you're thinking. Some guy in the comments is saying, I have Temporalis. I actually am already playing PoE1. I'm actually faster than PoE... No, you're not. You are sorely mistaken if you think Blink with Temporalis in PoE2 is a movement skill in PoE1. Let me introduce myself. This is 9 Frost Blinks per second. I think Temporalis Blink maxes out at maybe 4. And this is not the fastest character in Path of Exile 1. There are much faster characters. So, if you're thinking that Temporalis is the pinnacle of speed, no, it is not. It is a mid to maybe above average PoE1 build for a mirror-ish item. But, rolling down the list. Utility Flasks. In this game, in PoE2 there's only life and mana flasks. In PoE1, you'll pretty much progress throughout the campaign and not really worry about this. You'll just kind of use your life and mana flasks. But, utility flasks as you get to the end game become a really big deal. There's... Mage Blood is a very, very powerful item that's like a super endgame item. Don't really worry about that if you're like new to the game. But for the most part, these are kind of what charms are meant to be. Charms were put into PoE2 when they changed their flask philosophy, and I believe this is an improvement. I think the intent of removing utility flasks in PoE2 is a good idea. I think it was a step in the right direction. They just failed miserably with charms because they're not half as good as utility flasks are. But utility flasks in this game basically cover every ailment weakness you could possibly have. You can get full stun immunity, you can get shock immunity, you can get immunity to every ailment. I don't necessarily say this is a superior game design. Like I said, I, in this case, endorse the PoE2 system. But in PoE1, you can use utility flasks to basically trivialize every ailment or like negative character effect. And you basically will just get to the end game, slap on a bunch of utility flasks, use some instilling orbs, which make them trigger automatically when you get hit by certain stuff. And unlike charms that trigger after the effect, they're just like always up. Like they'll refresh during their own duration. You can pretty easily keep infinite charges. Like a good flask setup will cover pretty much all your ailments and weaknesses. It's so strong. Even like no Mage Blood. This is like literally every character right when they get to maps. A common thing though for new players is their flask setup is just terrible. It's just whatever like magic flask they put together. The difference between that character and a character with the exact same gear, exact same everything else that just actually puts a little bit of effort into getting good utility flasks will be night and day difference for how smooth the gameplay is and how much they die. And the only really thing it really takes is some alteration orbs. I'll get a little more into like end gameplay a little later though. But yeah, as a new player, don't worry about this. In fact, this is maybe a good warning that you might see PoE1 build guides If the build guide requires Mage Blood to play, that build is bait, and don't really worry about it. If the build guide is using Mage Blood, but works without it, that's not necessarily a bait build. That's just the reality of the situation, that virtually every build in PoE1 eventually gets to Mage Blood. So that could just be a build that is good, but naturally the character has progressed to the point of using Mage Blood. But just be cautious of this, because it's kind of a cheat code item. So try to avoid builds that require it, but maybe acknowledge that virtually every build will get there eventually if you invest high enough into it. Okay. This is a big, big difference in PoE1. This has changed over the years. It's changed every patch. There was a meme for years that, oh, PoE2 will fix melee. Because for a lot of leagues, melee was just worse than a lot of the spell and bow builds. But in Sellers, the Calgar League, 325, which has been the current league for, I think, 9 years now, melee is insane. Like, melee is the top build for everything. Like, all the bow guys who are usually playing Tornado Shot, they're all playing Lightning Strike this league. Like, you can argue, like, oh yeah, Lightning Strike isn't melee. Yeah, but the point is that they had a big balancing patch to really address the power gap. And a lot of the melee-based builds are insanely powerful now, to the point where lifelong bow guys are all rerolling Lightning Strike because the gap is just too big. But in PoE1 right now, melee is in the best state it's ever been. You could argue Legion Cyclone, but that was a stupid build, and it lasted for exactly 3 months. But the overall health of melee is great right now, and a lot of the top builds are melee. So if you're thinking PoE2 mindset, where like Maces and Titan is terrible, it is very, very different in PoE2. In fact, I have a diagram depicting this. You may not know what you're looking at here, but if you stick around long enough, this will all make sense. This is actually very clear if you understand the situation of melee in both games. But this is a meat creature. This is a meat creature. This is Juggernaut. He's got the S on his chest. You'll understand later. Trust me. Alright. There's a bunch of combat differences in the game. There's like stun bars in PoE2 that fill up when you deal damage. That's not a thing in PoE1. You can stun monsters by dealing a lot of damage to them. That is a thing. But there's no bar that fills up. It's just a random chance based on the size of the hit. Ailments work differently. They're a little bit like similar to that. In PoE2, ailments are a set size, and you can scale the magnitude. In PoE, and it's a chance to inflict that set ailment size based off the size of the hit. PoE1 ailments are different. They still depend on the size of the hit, but the size of the hit dictates the size of the ailment. So the bigger the hit, the bigger the shock. The bigger the cold hit, the bigger the chill. Ignite's the same, but it has more restrictive rules, so Ignite's kind of bad in PoE1. Don't play Ignite. This is a big one for a lot of people. There's no WASD. WASD, I haven't played with it. I'm used to my PoE1 controls, but to a lot of new players that play PoE2 and not PoE1, this might be a big negative. The counterpoint to this is a lot of PoE1 vets, when they were announced that they were adding WASD to the game, laughed at it and said no one's going to play that. They thought that's like some console player shit. And then a lot of those people played it and changed their mind and prefer it now. So it might be a two-way street. If you've only played WASD, you might go back to just the generic click to move and think that's fine, but that is a control difference. Other major PoE2 differences, there's no pause. So if you think you're going to pause to check something, that is not a thing in PoE1. If you open your passive tree in PoE1, it does not pause the game around you. Pretty much your only recourse if you're in a bad spot is to log out. Or if you want to check something, you have to portal and go to your hideout. These last couple things I would say are negatives that are worse in PoE1 that PoE2's improved upon. But you'll need to kind of adjust to that if you play the game. Higher levels are much easier. Right now, my character on both that I've shown so far are both level 98. My PoE1 character will gain about 0.5% every map. My PoE2 character, I will need to complete approximately 40 maps. No, probably 25 maps to gain 1% XP. So the higher levels are much, much, much faster. It's no one in PoE2 expects to reach 100. It's a very small crowd. A lot of PoE1 people expect to reach like at least the mid 90s. The levels are a little bit easier. Big difference, no one portal mapping. There is a 6 portal map. You can die 5 times. You can die with loot on the ground and come back and get it. A lot of people use this as a 6 portal defense. It kind of allows more glass cannon gameplay. But I personally feel this is a negative. I prefer the PoE1 stricter deaths. But people that like to employ the 6 portal defense, this will be a big improvement for them. You can respec ascendancies. There's not much to add here, but they deliberately made PoE2 ascendancies really strict that you can't switch between characters. But there's 3 ascendancies for each class, and you can switch pretty much at will just by unspecking all the points with 5 regrets each, which is the same cost-wise as gold you can do in PoE2. But then if you touch the ascendancy altar in PoE1 with all the points unspec'd, you can just change at the altar. Ascendancy is also much, much, much easier in PoE2 or in PoE1 than PoE2. You have to beat Labyrinth, which takes like 5 minutes, and that's it. There's no like Wave 4 Simulacrum or Wave 4 Sanctum, all that. Spirit is not a thing in PoE2 or in PoE1. I think this is something that PoE2 does better. The Spirit system, because it splits the mana resource and auras. And in PoE1, the system is all mana reservation. You'll see this character has a lot of auras, and it has a lot of mana reserved. There's no Spirit stat. It's something to get used to. There's mana reservation efficiency that allows you to restore more, reserve more auras. That's effectively like getting stats that have Spirit on them. But the power difference is very, very high. Auras in PoE1 are extremely powerful. There's a couple outliers in PoE2. Like, you can say Archmage, but, like, that's kind of just the whole build. That's not really, like, a stacked aura. It's only for mana builds. You can say Grim Feast, but when I talk about recovery a little more later, you'll see that Grim Feast wouldn't even, like, make the cut in this game. But, yeah, auras can give you a lot of passive defense. It can give you a lot of passive offense. You can have, like, 10 auras if you really want. Most builds have at least 2. The overall power of auras is probably higher. I would even say that, like, a lot of builds are more dependent on auras in this game than in PoE2. And then, lastly, charges are different. In PoE2, charges are basically just a resource you consume to unlock a better version of a skill that consumes charges, like Flicker Strike. But in PoE1, to an extent that does that, Flicker Strike consumes Frenzy charges or power with the other one. But charges in this game give a passive buff, and they're pretty dang strong. In fact, endurance charges got buffed in 325, and they're one of the most broken defensive things in the game. Like, my Jug has 10 endurance charges. That character is so immortal, it's hard to even describe. Like, a lot of people might be used to PoE2, where it's hard to make characters that can full face tank everything. That's kind of easy in PoE1, although the counterpoint to that is there's much higher scaling content than just like Uber bosses. Life builds are pretty dang weak in PoE2 because the balance between life and energy shield mana is really out of whack. In PoE1, life builds with endurance charges and possibly Fortify are some of the tankiest characters you can make. You can still get much bigger like energy shield numbers. Minor Matter works totally different. But pretty much all of them have access to really high recovery. But like especially the endurance charge change they've done has really buffed life builds to be insanely strong. But alright, key differences. This is a big negative, I think, for PoE2 players. The gem system is worse. It's just worse. PoE2 did improve upon this, but this is going to be the biggest pain point that new players have. You're going to get up to the campaign, you're going to start leveling, And you're going to realize that support gems aren't tied to the gem. They're tied to your sockets on gear. So you're going to have items that have sockets on them. And you're going to, your boots might have up to 4 sockets. You have to put the gems in the socket. And then you have to have them linked, which is done. You have to have a certain number of sockets. They're not guaranteed maximum sockets. You have to use Jeweler's Orbs to get them to max sockets. You have to use fusings. These are in place of like the Jeweler Orbs in PoE2. 6 links cost approximately as much as like a perfect Jeweler. It's going to be like a few divines to get a 6 link. You can't get a 6 link on every item. You can only get it on chest and 2-hand weapon. And then you have to have them all be the right color with chromatic orbs. So I can only put Frostblink in a blue socket, or technically a white socket. And they have to be the right color with chromes. This is just a worse system. I've been critical of PoE2 on a lot of things. It is overall a much worse game because the end game in PoE1 is so much better. But of the things that PoE2 has improved upon, the socket system is not good in PoE1. But you're going to have to get used to that. It's going to really be at its worst point during the campaign because you're going to have like an item that's like 3 blue. It's like a 3 link. They're all blue. That's your main spell you're using. And then you're going to find a better item like 20 levels later. And it's going to have way better stats, better resistances, it's higher item level base, so Elon can be happy. And it's going to have 2 unlinked top and bottom that are like red, green, blue, green. And you absolutely can't use that item just because it bricks your 3 link. Like, it's gonna be at its most pain mid-campaign. By the time you get to maps, these are fairly cheap common currencies that people eventually stop picking up. Kind of like your 4-link jeweler or your 3rd socket jeweler, your lesser jeweler, gets to that point in PoE2. Your first one you find, you're really happy. The 50th one you find, you don't care. By the time you get to mapping, everything but 6 links is pretty easy to get. But by the end of the campaign, this is going to be really painful, and you have to pay attention to sockets. A couple other things with supports. Unlike PoE2, support gems do have quality. They're also qualityed up with gem cutter prisms. And some of them are really strong. So just don't go around with... They have levels too. Like in PoE2, there are no levels, no quality. In the PoE1, there's levels and quality, and that can add a lot of power. There's there's awakened supports. There's enlighten, enhance, empower that are kind of like the lightning mastery skill, but better. But that's more endgame stuff. But that's the key difference. Mapping is very different. I've named a couple things so far that PoE2 does better. Essentially every single thing on the remainder of this list, overwhelmingly, PoE1 does better, and you're just gonna notice that trend. The entire remainder just shits on PoE2. Mapping, it's gonna be fast. You can choose the map you put in. If you have an augury map, you have to run an augury. In this game, you can run whatever map you want. There's some benefit to running a variety maps with things like destructive play for boss farming. Other people just choose to run the same map over and over because that's the one they like. I kind of maybe be a little in between. I like a little bit of variety. But, yeah, you pretty much don't have to play bad map layouts. There's favorite maps. So, of all these maps you can do, you can pick the ones that have good layouts. And then these are 10 times more likely to drop. So the vast majority of your time will be running maps with good layouts. That's a huge positive. You can use Horizon Orbs to change them. You do have to be scared of Reflect. That's an improvement that PoE2 maybe made, is there's no Reflect. In PoE1, you have to do something really unfortunate. You have to read. So when you put a map in, you have to read if there's Ellie Reflect, because it will kill your character instantly if you do Ellie damage. Fizz Reflect will kill your character instantly if you do... It is just so not tankable. It's an auto kill. The good news is you have 6 portals per map, but the bad news is you lose 10% XP. Look out for Reflect on maps. You don't have to complete the map by hunting down 10 rares. You leave when you're good and ready. If you've cleared 90% of the map and you want to leave, you're done. That's it. If you kill the boss, you can leave. Some maps have like a guardian boss that drops like a fragment, which is like the boss invite thing you want, and you really only are incentivized to go kill that boss and leave. Other times, you'll really juice up a map with a bunch of like league mechanics that's going to drop a ton of loot, and you might kill the boss with the map only 40% done. You should definitely stay and clear the whole map because you've set up that map to drop a lot of loot. You should probably kill the whole thing. But if you get to 12 monsters remaining and one of them's a rare off in Africa, you don't have to go find it. You can just leave and be like, yeah, okay, I missed that monster, whatever. Way better system. Juicing, though, is way better in this game. You don't have to bother with towers. There's items called scarabs, and these items are basically what the tablets are in PoE2, and they add certain league mechanics to maps. They can also add just really crazy effects. Like, they're not all league mechanics. There's a lot of them. You can put things. There are certain scarabs that, like, every rare monster has 2 additional mods is one of them. Like, there are some of them where, like, all the rares are twinned. Like, you can put up to 5 in a map. You can put the map here and have 5 in. And there's some pretty insane combos. Like a baseline tier 17 map versus a tier 17 map that has the most terrifying possible combination of 5 scarabs. The super juiced map could be over 100 times harder. Like, it could be 10 times the damage and 100 times the HP. Like, but it could be 100 times more rewarding. You have a lot of freedom in how difficult you want to make the game and how rewarding you want to make the game. And you don't have to screw with towers. A lot of people that played PoE1 prefer the scarab system over the tower system. I think that's a pretty common consensus. Even with PoE2 only players, a lot of them don't like the tower system. I think you'll find the scarab mapping system much better. Next big difference. There is really no crafting in PoE2. For an insane amount of money, you can do mediocre targeted crafting with omens, and you can spend thousands of divines to try to make a mirror-worthy item. That's really the only crafting there is, besides maybe like greater essence, but even essence is different in this game. Essence just gives you a specific mod. It doesn't like essence in PoE2 is basically just like fossils, where it just gives you a random mod of this category. That's what fossils do in PoE1. But like 58's the top int roll. If I use this on a ring, it's going to give me 58 int, period. So it's a lot more determinism. So it's in general much easier to get good items in this game because there's such an abundance of crafting. There's a few different currencies that are like way more potent. There's scouring orbs. That's a huge difference. In PoE1, in PoE2, you start with a base item. You basically keep adding mods till it's bricked, and then you chaos it like 7 times, lying to yourself, telling yourself you can fix it, and then you just keep making it worse. And then you drop it on your hideout ground in shame after you actually wasted 21 extra exalts worth of chaos orbs. In this game, when shit goes south, you can just scour and start over. Alterations can just completely reroll a magic item. They're pretty common. You get them just from like vendoring items. And you can pretty well reroll magic items to be perfect. There's no targeted regals, but there's a lot of tools afterwards. The most powerful crafts, you can use meta crafting, which is what divine orbs are actually expensive for in this game. In PoE2, it's kind of exalted orbs are the cheap currency and divines are the expensive currency. The only real divine sync is actually divining items. In this game, chaos orbs are the cheap currency. Exalts are actually kind of in between. They're more expensive. You don't just randomly slam items hoping to get an upgrade usually. But chaos full rerolls an item, as if it just dropped rare again. Every mod gets rerolled. So don't have a mod item with like 4 good mods and 1 bad mod and think you're going to chaos it to save it. But chaos is like the cheap currency. It's very common. And then divines are the expensive currency. But one of the reasons the divines are like a lot more valuable in this game is they don't just reroll items. They allow you to craft some very powerful crafts on items. Like, these are basically what the omens are in PoE2. But, like, potentially stronger. Because you're not just chaos orbing one mod. You can just like lock the prefixes, scouring orbit, clean the suffixes, and then you can use like targeted mods like Veiled Orb to like guarantee put a certain mod on an item. And then you have the crafting bench to fill out your remaining mods. So like the common way to craft good endgame items in PoE1 is to have like either 3 good suffixes or 3 good prefixes, and then metacraft one of the two sides by doing like a reforge with like the good mods locked, reforging a targeted mod on the harvest bench, which can like pick you a mod. Like I might have a chest that's like a hybrid chest. It's a bunch of armor and energy shield. And by the way, armor's a lot better in this game. So armor, energy shield, chests are actually good. But you might get 3 good prefixes that have like, you know, top roll, energy shield, and armor. You can lock prefixes, reforge fizz, guarantee get fizz damage reduction suffix, which is a very powerful mod in this game that's way better than armor. And then you could like go for the Veiled Orb 50-50 and then finish with a crafted mod. And you have like a perfect 6 mod item, basically. It's going to cost some currency to do that. Like the craft I just described probably costs like 30 divines. But it would be a mirror tier chest in PoE2. There's a lot more like layers of crafting. You can craft for under a you can craft decent items for like 30 chaos in this game. You can craft what would be mirror tier items in PoE2 for like 10 to 20 divines in this game. But any craft you can fill out just with like a crafted mod. Like if you have like a pair of boots that drop that have like really good prefixes and they're just missing some res, you can just put on fire and chaos res on them. You can just finish off with 20 fire and cold res. Like you have full agency over finishing the res. Maybe you find a pair of boots that has lightning res, but your res right now is 130 lightning res and 50 fire res. You can go over to the harvest bench and you can change that lightning res to fire res for what is like almost 0 currency. So you can just switch whichever res you want on your gear. This even works with max res rolls, not just like straight res. Basically, the other thing with crafting, I'm not going to go into all the details, but in PoE1, there's a ton of league mechanics that have accumulated over the years. This contributes to a lot of like what people call the bloat of PoE1. But the thing is, a lot of those league mechanics have their own crafting methods that are still in the game. And so there's a ton of different ways to craft an item using different league mods or league styles. You can craft a good item using fossils. You can craft a good item using essence. You can craft a good item with beasts. Like, there's a bunch of league mechanics that all... And oftentimes, the best way to craft is a combination of these things. Like, I'm going to use essence for the first step, then I'm going to use harvest, then I'm going to finish, you know. This is a lot of, like, the deep knowledge that PoE1 has that, like, a newer player is going to struggle to catch up on. So if you're not wanting to absorb a ton of information, probably the answer is to just get used to buying some of the items and just get used to being able to use the crafting bench to, like, cater those items to your needs. Alright. There's a little bit of difference with itemization. In PoE2, the mods basically have 6 roles, 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. Those are the 6 explicit mods. In PoE2, there's more than that. There's Eldritch implicits. You'll see these boots have 6% action speed and 0.2 regen per endurance charge. You can add these to an item after the fact. That's just one of the many currencies the game has. Like, this chest has less damage taken per 200 int, which is insanely powerful. And 20% effect of all auras, which is also insanely powerful. There's influence mods, which are modifiers. I don't have any on this character right now, but it's modifiers that don't drop on normal bases. So, like, you could have a pair of gloves that can only roll the normal glove mods. You could have an influence pair of glove mods drop that can drop they can roll with special modifiers that only that influence can have. So you can have a pair of boots drop that have action speed on them if they're hunter influenced. But boots normally can't roll action speed. It's like a special pool of mods that are generally even more powerful that have to be on that base. There's drop only mods. This might sound out of place for a PoE2 player, but there's mods that drop that they can only drop. You cannot roll them naturally. Once again, in the context of PoE1, where you can like Chaos Orb and Alteration Orb items, you'll never be able to roll those mods again. They only appear when the item first drops. So that can usually means they're more powerful. Cluster jewels are really OP. You have your passive tree here. You have jewel sockets like you'd have in PoE2. But you have also cluster jewels, which do some crazy powerful things. That's like a pretty endgame thing, but they're really strong. Fractured items are very good. It removes a lot of the randomness in crafting an item because, like this pair of boots, the 99% energy shield's fractured. So that means if I spam this with a Chaos Orb, it will always have 99 energy shield on it, period. If I corrupt it, it will always have energy shield on it. If I essence it, it will always roll with that. You cannot get rid of that modifier. It's locked in. Also, side note, Vol Orbs are much scarier in PoE1. Don't use them lightly. In PoE2, they're a much softer brick. In PoE1, they brick your item like half the time. So be very, like, if you Vol Orb something in PoE1, commit that you're going to lose the item before you Vol Orb it. Alright, last thing I'm going to touch on is just the differences in the game damage. Max Res is very powerful. The reason Max Res kind of sucks in PoE2 is two reasons. The first is that most of the damage of the game is fizz damage. The second is the minus max map mod. One, you can't roll it off. If you are scared by minus max in PoE1, you can just Chaos Orb the map and get rid of it. So you don't have to run that on your best maps. But like the 25 pen mod is insane in PoE2. Like on a character that has 90 all res, that 25 pen mod that can get scaled up to like 35% just means monsters deal 4.5 times damage. So it's like it just almost invalidates max res in PoE2. But the ratio of damage in PoE2 is much heavier fizz and much lighter Ellie. And all the map mods that add Ellie damage add only like 30 to 40%. Where in PoE1, they only convert fizz damage, which is a little different with damage conversion in this game. But they roll like over 100%. And so, TLDR, in PoE1, the percentage of damage you take in the game is mostly elemental damage. And the later you get into the game, the higher percentage it goes to Ellie. Low early tier maps, you'll fight a lot of fizz damage and not a lot of Ellie damage. By the absolute most endgame content you're fighting, virtually all the damage you're taking will be elemental. So max res is very strong, and you can like purposefully avoid it. So a lot of PoE1 characters have 90, like that are actually well built defensively. A lot of them, it's almost an expectation to have 90 max res. It still works like PoE2 where 75 is the default max, but you have to gain max res somewhere else. Like you have to put talent points in and get +2 max all res. You have to get +2 max res on your shield. This character doesn't actually have 90 all res. It has 88, 88, 89. And if I had 90, it would be 20% tankier. So it's a good stat. Guard skills. This is like the biggest defensive thing. They always talk in PoE2 about active combat. Honestly, PoE1 has more active combat. It's more engaging. In PoE2, you just blow up the whole screen. In PoE1, you have guard skills that you can use preemptively before you take a big hit. It's like a short duration that like makes you tankier for that short duration, and then it has a cooldown. And you can use guard skills to make yourself tankier before a hit. You can also just use guard skills linked to cast when damage taken. That way, the guard skill gets used after you've taken a certain amount of damage. This is not good to use against potential one-shots, but when you're mapping and you maybe are about to get shotgunned by like 20 hits at once, that's a really good thing, because then after 5 of the hits have hit you and knocked you down to half HP, the guard skill will trigger and absorb some damage and help maybe save your life. But there's Molten Shell, Arcane Cloak, Steel Skin, and Immortal Call. And they all do something a little different, but the gist of it is different ones are strong for different builds, but they allow you to be tankier momentarily, either proactively by you using it before a big hit, or reactively by linking it to caster damage taken. You can actually make very, very, very tanky characters in this game. Like, to be able to AFK anything, basically. Fizz damage reduction is... Armor's better than PoE2, but there's a stat called physical damage reduction, which is baked into endurance charges, and it's insanely powerful. I'll give you an example of why it's powerful. Let's say you have 20 fizz damage reduction. You might think that means you take 20% less fizz damage. Not really. Because, let's say you're taking a ton of fizz damage. A lot of monsters are hitting you. And remember, armor's better in this game. So, let's say you have a decent amount of armor, and your armor's mitigating 70% of the damage. If you have 20 fizz damage reduction, how much a percent damage do you think you're taking? It's 10%. It adds after. The percent reduction from armor calculates first, and then the flat fizz reduction gets added to that reduction after. So instead of taking, by having that 20 fizz damage reduction, instead of taking 30% damage from all those hits, you're only taking 10%. You're 3 times tankier by having 10 flat fizz reduction. It stacks additively in the best way possible with armor. So it not only is like better than armor, because it works on any size hit, but in combination with armor, it actually makes armor better. The two of them have just like really powerful synergy together, and a good character in PoE1 can like pretty much trivialize fizz damage with a combination of these two things. Fizz taken as Ellie's pretty good, because remember we talked about a lot of characters have like 90 max res, and so if they're lacking in the armor department, maybe they're an energy shield character with no armor, they can get a little bit of Fizz taken as Ellie, albeit they've made this harder to get in the last patch, so it's a little harder to get, but you can still get like helmet mods, you can use lightning coil, there's a couple ways to get Fizz taken as Ellie. Fortify is a melee-only defense that's pretty dang strong. It pretty much just says, hey, melee chads take less damage. If you're using and killing stuff and hitting stuff with melee skills, you get a temporary buff that makes your character take less damage from hits. It's one of the ways long ago they decided to balance melee characters because they're taking more damage by being in melee. And for some reason, they decided that this was not a good idea to add into PoE2 because fuck melee, I guess. Same with endurance charges. Endurance charges are much more widely available to melee characters. For example, this character has 2 endurance charges. My melee character has 10 endurance charges. And his are more powerful. So he has 50 flat fizz as opposed to 8 and 50 all Ellie reduction. But yeah, also, I know what you're thinking, right? Isn't melee slow? No, in this game melee's fast. Melee is like insanely fast in this game. This is how my melee character moves all the time. It has no cooldown and it's a 0.18 second attack. I've slightly bricked this character too. Like, I don't even have all my stuff on. I don't even have all my talent points in. Like, my character's actually faster than this. But, like, in my momentarily bricked character, this is how fast he moves. And he hits the entire screen. Like, melee is so much better in this game. Alright. A big change defensively is there's percent life on the talent tree. So, you'll see spots, there's a lot of life nodes. If you're playing a life character, if you're used to PoE2, you just ignore, like, there is no life nodes. So you're just putting all your points into damage. In PoE1, all over the tree, there are life points. You do need to take these if you want to play the game and not die. You are expected to take a decent amount of these you path by. You'll notice I haven't taken all of them. It's kind of a balancing game. Sometimes you want to trade defense for offense. You actually have to make that consideration in PoE1. In PoE2, you basically just like stack offense on your tree and that's it. But you'll notice some of these I am taking, and some of them I'm not. But for the most part, if you're a life character, you will want to take, at the very least, the efficient life nodes. You don't, like if you path by this, you don't need to take the small one afterwards maybe, but I would take the big two. You know, I didn't take this one, but sometimes I do. I took, you know, and if you're really lacking, you might take all three. You know, some people take this whole wheel of life nodes. Some people just path through and get the big one, but be used to taking life nodes. I would view that as a positive. You might be like, oh, I'm just losing damage. No, because it actually gives you agency over your character's defense. If you have a character that's just one-shotting the whole screen and it's dying, in PoE2, you do have options you can take to try to help that, but not nearly as many. Whereas in PoE1, you can just be like, okay, I'm way too glass cannon. I have way too much damage. I'm going to take some points out of damage. I'm going to put them into life. So I'm going to lose 30% of my damage. I'm going to get 30% more life. And now I'm not dying anymore. Sweet. Now the boss lives for 4 seconds instead of 3, but I'm not dying. It might sound, depending on which ARPG or PoE2 you came from, it might sound worse, but it gives you a lot more control over your offensive and defensive balance. Spells work a little differently in PoE 1 and 2. In PoE2, block and evasion works on all attacks and all spells. In PoE 1, it only works on attacks for block and evasion. There is spell suppression and spell block. Spell suppression just lowers the damage of spells. Very powerful. Spell block is just a different stat that is just exactly what it sounds like. It's just changed to block spells. The last thing, this is maybe more of an endgame thing, but recovery in PoE 1 is basically infinity. I do think this is a negative thing overall because it means the game has to be balanced around things one-shotting you. But just understand that in this game, there's a lot of tools at your disposal to get infinite recovery. Like, instant leech is just basically full recovery every like millisecond. It's insane. There's like 10 different tools you have in this game that can make it so that your character never dies unless it gets one shot. And then like a couple mechanical changes. Recoups every 4 seconds instead of 8 and scalable by recovery rate. So recoup in PoE 1 is definitely stronger than PoE 2. Leech works differently because it's a longer duration and it's basically guaranteed 20% recovery. It's a lot more complicated in PoE 1, but the way it basically works is if you are hitting something and dealing that type of damage, your character will always be recovering 20% life per second until your life globe fills. So if you're losing life and hitting stuff, you will just always be recovering like 20%. And you can scale that number higher. You can go Vol Pact and get that up to like 40. Actually, no, they buff Vol Pack. Oh, they actually buff Vol Pack in 325. I forgot. But you can get like leech recovery rate. Like, where is it? One of these is leech recovery rate. Like this one would make your 20% into 28% per second. But I mean, the TLDR is recovery is much higher in this game. And you can, if you build your recovery well, basically get to a point where the only way you can die is a one shot. But if I get too into the weeds, this will be a 2-hour video. But I know I've rambled here for like a half hour. But if you're playing PoE2 and you enjoyed it, that doesn't necessarily mean PoE1's for you. But if you are one of those players that played PoE2 a lot, and you are at a point where you feel like there's no build variety, and the endgame is really stale, and there's not any more content for you to do, PoE1 is the game for you. Because there is 100 times more endgame content. There is 1,000 times more viable builds. There are builds that no one's ever heard of that are better than the builds everyone's heard of, and just no one's thought of it yet. Because the game has that much more depth to it. There's so much more agency you have over your character design, over the things you can scale, over what you can do. If you are a PoE2 player that has never played PoE1, and you want a deeper endgame than the puddle that is PoE2, and you want just more overall freedom with mapping, with the league mechanics you farm, if you want to farm Expedition every map, you can. If you never want to see Expedition again, you can. If you want to run strand for the rest of your days, you can. The angles of freedom in this game are like infinite. And if you are at the state in PoE2 where you're like, man, I'm tired of Herald of Ice, Hoa, and Archmage, when they come out with the 19 new Ascendancy League, you better log in. I'll see you next time.